Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on how Ordnance Survey data and GIS can help social housing providers combat pressing issues. I can see that there's lots of people registered, and I can see that there are names popping up and logging in, which is fantastic. So please continue to do that. What I'll do while people are just coming in is just give some really basic housekeeping before we get into the presentation side of things. So before we begin, we will send the recording out of the webinar, so it's all recorded. So don't worry about having to frantically write your notes down when you see stuff. It's all going to be recorded, and you'll be able to go through it again at the end. Um, Please feel free to submit any questions at any point. So we like to keep these sessions as interactive as possible. So there is a poll question. There's a couple of poll questions at the start, but please feel free to ask questions at any time, and we'll answer them as we go through the presentations itself. And then there's also an exit survey on the way out. So once we've finished the webinar, what you can do is there's an exit survey, and that helps us improve the webinars that we continue to run as a company. And this will be emailed to you. This will be the opportunity to open it up at the end, but it'll also be emailed to you at a later stage as well. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just introduce who we are today. So my name is Ian Usher. I've been at CAD Corp for 10 years and I'm a business development manager, and I look after our land and property sector, which means I have the responsibility for the account management of our social housing customers, which is pretty much everybody on this call, which is great. I'm now going to pass over to Simon. So let Simon introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Good morning, everybody. My name's Simon Parker. I'm the pre-sales team leader at CAD Corp. And later on this morning, I'll be demonstrating some use case examples of how Ordnance Survey data and GIS can help social housing providers.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. And then I'm really pleased to be joined from Robert Wingfield from the OS. So would you like to introduce yourself, Robert?
Morning all, thank you Ian. Good morning everyone. I'm Robert Wingfield. I'm a Senior Technical Relationship Consultant at Ordnance Survey. It's really great to be on this webinar. CADCORP are a premium partner of Ordnance Survey. We have a fantastic, strong, long-standing relationship. So many thanks to the CADCORP team for inviting me to present. It's really great to be here. Later on, I'm going to talk through how Ordnance Survey data and services can really support yourselves, combat pressing issues, particularly the new analytical buildings data that Ordnance Survey have recently released. Thank you very much. Back to you, Ian.
Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you, Robert. So what we do at this point is we tend to turn the cameras off just to kind of improve the bandwidth of the presentations and demonstrations. So we're going to turn our cameras off now, but what we'll do is I'll turn them back on for the question and answer section at the end. So again, I can see that there's a lot more people logged in, which is great. So a very warm welcome to everybody that has joined today. This is the agenda for today's webinar. So I can see that some of you that have registered new to CAD Corp, which is great. So we're going to just give a really brief introduction to CAD Corp, just so you know who we are. I've then got a couple of slides that talks about how GIS is currently used in housing before we look at the main kind of webinar. So we can look at how existing OS data and GIS can be used to help social housing providers combat pressing issues with a demonstration from Simon, before then passing over to Robert Wingfield from the Ordnance Survey, who's going to talk to us more about the National Geographic databases and kind of what options that opens up for you guys in terms of data. And then we're going to touch on next steps before we look at questions, and then we'll close. So this webinar should run for about maybe 45, 55 minutes. So what we'll do is we'll go through, and if we don't have time for questions at the end, I'll maybe reserve the right just to send them back to you over emails if you do have anything, but please feel free to send them across. So as I've said, we like to keep these webinars as interactive as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up, we've got two poll questions that we like to ask. So I'm going to load up the first one. So I'm just going to launch it. And the first one asks, does your organization use Ordnance Survey data to support the business decisions? So currently you might use it, and you might use it primarily for your base mapping. There's a lot of people that probably use master map and raster data and some address point as the kind of base mapping data. But have you thought about using it or building it into your business processes to help with the business decisions that you guys are making? So I'll just give you a couple more seconds to answer. before I end it. And I will end that poll there. Just about to say that another one came in. I'll end that poll there. And I can see, so in front of me, I can see that there's a 50-50 split on yes or no. So that's good. So some of you have already utilising the existing data that you've got and building it into your business processes, but others have probably come to this webinar just to see what they can do with it. So that's a really good place to start. And then our second question relates to GIS. So how familiar are you with GIS? So it's good for us to understand, do you have a really good understanding? Are you a key user within your organization of GIS? Or are you looking at it from kind of a business case point of view? Is this something that you want in your organization and you want to understand more about how it works and what you're doing with it? And again, I'll just give you a couple more seconds. Excellent. And I will end that poll. I'll end that poll now. Yeah, excellent. Okay, that's really good. Thank you very much for completing those questions. So that question, a lot of you answered that you're very familiar with GIS. So that's really good. So you come to a place to you know what it can do, you understand it, and you want to see what the benefits are that you can get with Ordnance Survey data and the challenges that you've got across organisations. That's really good. So thank you very much for answering those questions. Just very briefly about CAD Corp. So we are a UK-based software development company, and we provide a GIS, we provide location data, and we provide services designed to support organisations across many, many different sectors. And as we've said, kind of I look after our land and property sector, which includes our kind of social housing providers. And what we provide is the CAD Corp SIS application, and that provides desktop, web, and mobile-based mapping applications, which can be cloud-hosted for ease of access and management, or we can be flexible and install applications locally on your own infrastructure if organisations want to do that. And there's a number of key strengths that we've got, or the CAD Corp SIS provides, and that focuses on kind of data formats. We support lots and lots of different data formats, whether it be flat files or in databases and web services from the Environment Agency, for example. There's a lot of advanced functionality included as standard. There's an API available for the customization and development of the applications that we provide. And then what you'll see from this presentation is that we support all of the Ordnance Survey data, and we are a premium partner. And we'll talk more about this shortly in a second. These are the customers that we currently provide GIS and location data to. And the reason I put this up for is to identify that you don't have to be an organization with lots of properties. You can utilize GIS for the same reasons across the board that everybody's using it for. So I always use the example of probably our smallest housing association, which is Teen Housing. They look after between 5,000 and 6,000 properties. But then our biggest, which is L&Q, look after 140,000 properties. But they're all using GIS and spatial data or location data to improve the decision-making processes or decisions that they want to make across the organisation. And there are lots and lots of uses of GIS in housing, and this is just a really brief example of the types of work that can be done with GIS in the housing sector, and that keeps getting added to. And this is not by any means, it's not a definitive list either. So there might be examples today that you can think of that aren't contained on there, but it doesn't mean it's not used. These are some of the examples that we get from our existing customers. And the applications that we use to support the GIS in housing, the main one that we're going to look at today and we'll concentrate on is the CAD Corp SIS web map. So this is our web map application that allows users to query and visualize spatial information through an easy to use and interactive website. It's designed to have a user-friendly interface, so it's pretty much it's very similar to the way that Google Maps works, and nobody's ever had any training on it, but everybody knows how to use it. As I said, it's simple to use. It supports all of the OS products, so that you can use it for the base mapping, or you can use the address point for theming your data. It's got a responsive interface, so it knows the kind of device that you're accessing the application from and responds accordingly with, the opportunity to use your finger taps to interact with it, or your mouse if you're accessing it from a laptop or a tablet. And there are additional add-ins that enhance the functionality that we provide. So things like reporting functionality, editing. There's a constraint search module, and there's integration with the What Three Words module as well. And then just very briefly, CAD Corp are an Ordnance Survey premium partner, and we've been a partner for over 25 years, and we're a British company who provide applications to British organisations. Therefore, it's imperative that we support the Ordnance Survey data as soon as it becomes available to the customer. So that provides so what we do is we provide the ability for our customers to easily read the data. We provide loaders to make it easier to import and use our knowledge of ourselves of how to use the data. In order for customers to take full advantage of the Ordnance Survey data that we provide, we install wizards and loaders within the CAD Corp's desktop application that allow you to take the data and put it into a format that it can be used later down the line. So things like loading it into a database so that we recognize it and then it can be put into the web map application. We can also provide a managed service. So that allows CAD Corp to provide the location data, but it also allows us to load that into your databases so that it's ready to go within your desktop and web mapping application straight away. You're not having to wait for any processes to be run. We can provide that as a service as part of the applications. And then finally, we do provide all of the Ordnance Survey data portfolio, and we'll talk about more about some of the data sets as we go through the presentation today. So that leads us nicely into today's webinar. So how Ordnance Survey data and GIS can help social housing providers combat pressing issues. So social housing providers are facing a number of pressing issues such as ensuring stock is sustainable, mitigating against damp and mold and flooding, and risks from climate change. And these are all issues that can have a significant impact on the health and well-being of its tenants. Ordnance Survey data and GIS can be used to help social housing providers combat these issues. So Ordnance Survey data, the location data, is the most accurate and up-to-date geospatial data available in the UK. And a GIS, such as the CAD Corp SIS system, is a system for capturing, storing, analysing and managing geographical data. Okay, so we're gonna go through a number of examples. So these are through conversations that we've had with social housing providers. We've come across a number of example challenges that social housing providers are facing that Ordnance Survey and GIS can help with. So these are looking at the bullet points. These are evidencing and reporting on the condition of the stock, how organisations are trying to make themselves more sustainable, identifying and ranking the most urgent issues and planning targeted interventions, such as possible flood risks, damp and mold, and social behaviour, and supporting grounds maintenance schedules to ensure accuracy and cost effectiveness. So when you hear from Simon towards the end of this webinar, he's going to be providing kind of examples based on these 4 criteria through the web map application that you'll see at the end. Okay, I suppose it's worth saying as well, you don't have to submit a question. If you look at these and think, well, actually, they're not my challenges, then please put that in the questions. And that's something that we could take away and come back to you on later. So if you think there's something that's relevant, great. If you think, actually, that's not, I've got this issue, please let us know. And we can share that at the end maybe. Or like I say, we can come back to you and tell you how you might look at using GIS and Ordnance Survey data to help you with the issues that you've got. So before we get into the presentation, I think it's important just to understand the Ordnance Survey data, because we're going to be mentioning quite a few data sets, and it's good to have the kind of a basic knowledge of what they're used for. So just going from top left, we've got the Ordnance Survey master map topography. So this is the most detailed mapping that Ordnance Survey provide, and it contains building outlines, the location of roads, bus stops, building curtilages. So it gives really detailed information in terms of the base mapping and that you'll want to use within your organization. The OS address space, which is top right, that provides the ability for you to geocode your existing stock against the address base, but also utilize the unique property reference number, the national unique property reference number, within your own stock. And something we'll talk about more as we go through the data sets. The bottom left is our OS master map highways data. So this provides a topological network that effectively allows you to provide routes across the organization. So routing in terms of how far residents can get from A to B to make sure that you've got community facilities within those particular areas, but also can be used internally for your repairs team. So your repairs teams might look at the routes that they've taken over time and go, actually, can we be more efficient in the way that we work? And the OS master map highways data allows you to be provides that ability to do that. And then finally, we're also going to talk about the Terrain 5 data. So that's a 3D data set that provides heights at 5 meter intervals. So this can be used for when you're analysing. In the example we're going to use later, it's going to look at how it can be used against kind of electrical vehicle charging points, and we'll talk about more about that. But I just wanted to give you an insight into the main four data sets that we're going to talk about during this presentation. So, social housing providers are facing a multitude of challenges in maintaining the condition and performance of the stock, which has an impact on both tenant well-being and their own budgetary constraints. So many social housing many social housing units are older and prone to issues like poor insulation, outdated electrical systems, and generally need some level of repair. These factors can contribute to health problems, energy inefficiency, and higher maintenance costs. Limited resources to deal with problems often restrict proactive maintenance, leading to reactive repairs, higher costs, and tenant disruption. Prioritising repairs effectively becomes difficult without a clear understanding of property condition across the portfolio. And outdated or inaccurate data on property dimensions, locations, and features can lead to inefficient resource allocation and misinformed repair schedules. So through the use of data sets such as the OS address base from the Ordnance Survey, social housing providers can utilise the national unique property reference number in order to geocode the stock, which is what we've just talked about. That provides the basic understanding of, and I suppose simple understanding of where a property is located in relation to others across its own portfolio. So OS address base not only provides the ability to geocode the data and get a coordinate from it, but it also provides additional attributes that social housing providers can benefit from, such as the type of property, the number of floors, the year built, and many, many more different attributes that you can utilize. The organisation can then amend their own business data to the address-based data in order to visualize stock conditions through the GIS. So this can easily identify repair history, environmental factors, building design data, and it can be used to predict potential issues and schedule preventative maintenance, which looks at reducing overall costs and disruptions. And then Ordnance Survey provide accurate and up-to-date information on addresses and building curtilages, and when integrated with internal business data, provides the opportunity for an accurate, up-to-date, and reliable stock database that can help make those kind of informed business decisions that you need to make. So secondly, looking into sustainability, social housing providers have an objective to ensure that all of this stock have an EPC rating of C or above before being let out or rented, and therefore need support to implement energy efficiencies within a relatively short period of time. So at the same time, social housing providers are looking beyond building sustainability and into their own travel sustainability, ensuring that staff are taking the most efficient routes across their individual patches, ensures that the cost of fuel can possibly be reduced. And then finally, as electric cars are used by residents within tenancies, social housing providers face the issue of ensuring that EV charging points are accessible to the tenant, whether that be on site or within an off-site parking point. So Ordnance Survey data allows the visualization of EPC ratings. Therefore, organizations can easily view where ratings are below that C standard in a particular state or neighborhood and plan, for example, a program of scheduled upgrades at the same time, making it more efficient across the board. Using the OS highways network within GIS, organizations can optimize the routes that operatives take when traveling out and about on site, which can help which can help with individual sustainability targets. And then as many social housing providers look at electrical vehicle charging point installations, a site suitability and selection can be determined through the use of OS Master Map, to determine the land ownership and proximity to existing infrastructure, but also the terrain data we talked about earlier to evaluate the kind of the topology and the ground conditions that it needs to be based on. So you will have heard on the news recently that environmental risks such as flooding or damp and mold can create major risks to properties and tenant safety. Assessing vulnerabilities and planning mitigation strategies requires detailed location data. And at the same time, the antisocial behaviour such as graffiti and fly tipping can disrupt communities and damage properties in a similar way. So understanding the spatial distribution of such incidents and taking preventative measures is crucial. So when overlaying the address-based data or master map data over the Environment Agency's flooding data, you can easily view where properties may be at direct risk or close proximity to flooding areas. This allows the organisation to build strategies for vulnerable tenants and also look at mitigating against flooding and damp and mould in the future through evacuation plans or simply looking at buyouts or disposals of properties that may be affected. And I suppose by analysing historical data and identifying hotspots of antisocial behaviour, predictive models can anticipate future incidents and inform targeted preventative measures like CCTV installation or community outreach programmes. And then finally, Ordnance Survey data and GIS can support grants maintenance schedules. So social housing providers are having to rely on a lot of conversations that I have are having to rely on paper-based records and manual inspections, which can be very time-consuming, inefficient, and prone to errors. Outdated or inaccurate data on property boundaries, vegetation types, and infrastructure can lead to inefficient resource allocation and ineffective maintenance strategies. And it's also about the tenants. So keeping tenants informed about planned maintenance activities and potential disruptions can be challenging, which leads to them being frustrated and having a misunderstanding of what's happening in their area. So by integrating Ordnance Survey data, such as the master map data, into the capturing of the grounds maintenance data, ensures that it's precise, it's up to date, and it can provide information on property boundaries and estate extents where social housing providers have responsibility. So you're effectively mapping your grounds maintenance data against the most accurate mapping you've got in terms of the master map data. And like I say, that's the most up-to-date data that you'll get from the Ordnance Survey. And then having that data available having the grounds maintenance data available in electronic applications such as GIS makes the information easily accessible, and when stored and accessed from a centralized location, ensures that users are viewing accurate grounds maintenance information, which could also provide the opportunity to share that with tenants within their organization too. Okay. So what we're going to do now is Simon is going to provide a demonstration which looks at the examples we discussed a second ago through the use of existing Ordnance Survey data sets and the CAD-Corp SIS web map application. So what I'll do now is I'll just pass over to Simon, who will share his screen and go through the demonstration with you.
Great, thank you, Ian. So, yep, I'll share my screen and then we'll make a start on my demonstration. Great. So, yeah, as Ian described, I'm going to share a couple of use case examples where Ordnance Survey data can help social housing providers. And I'm going to show some examples why matching your property list to the Ordnance Survey address-based product can provide useful insight. We'll look at examples of the use of the master map topography and imagery layers. And then I'll also just sort of finish off at the end, sharing some use case examples with the NGD transport layer as well. And I'm going to be sharing these examples with the CAD-Corp SIS web map application, which provides a simple to use platform for accessing geographical information. And that can be used by colleagues, stakeholders, or even your customers or residents, if you wish to share information to them as well. So one of the first stages of adopting GIS and mapping is to geocode your properties. And in very simple terms, it means assigning every property in your stock with a set of coordinates so that they can be located with Ordnance Survey mapping. And that process involves matching your property list against the Ordnance Survey address-based product. which shows every address and their location in Great Britain. Here is an example of what address space looks like. So here I'm using these red circles here on the map to show every individual address. But once your property list is matched to this data set, you'll get a view that looks a little bit like this. So a map which just shows the locations of your properties. And if I zoom out of the map, let's go to the extent of Brighton in my use case today, you can see sort of the geographical spread of your assets. But beyond these, simple points on the map, you can link these points to information from your housing or asset management systems, or maybe other sources of data. So let me show you a couple of use case examples. So a key role for social landlords is to provide tenants with safe homes, and stock condition surveys can help you understand the condition of your homes and assist you in the planning of repairs, and also planning future investment programs. And if you link that information to your property points on the map, you can then use the map to visualize that stock condition information. Now I'm going to just share sort of one example this morning, just because of time constraints. Loft insulation is one aspect that is important for energy efficiency, but it's also one that must meet specific building regulations. And these regulations have changed many times over the years, so probably won't be much of a surprise with these changing standards that you'll have maybe some properties which don't meet those current standards, but perhaps they previously did. And it's these, aspects of a property that you can visualize on the map. And it could be as simple as this sort of traffic light system approach that I've used here today. So here, just using sort of a green circle to represent a property that meets that current standard, and a red circle where they don't. But the map gives us that, geographical view of that information instead of looking at rows of data in a spreadsheet, and that allows you to spot locations where properties aren't meeting a specific standard. So if I zoom into the map, it could be, we've got a group of properties here across two adjacent estates. But unless we know the area well, you might not actually realize from a spreadsheet of data that these properties are actually in close vicinity to each other. So the map here does give us that element of location, and we can use that information to efficiently plan a program of works to improve the loft installation for these two groups of properties at the same time. But you can of course use a map to provide insight into other factors included in stock condition survey. So that might be looking at the condition of kitchens and bathrooms as alternative examples. This next use case I've shared many times previously, but yep, it's still at the top of the agenda, and that is EPC. So in a similar vein to the previous use case, you can show the EPC ratings for your properties. But more importantly, those that aren't meeting that 2030 target of achieving a minimum C standard. So again, the map has given us that element of location, and we can look at efficiently planning retrofits where needed. Let's move out to Brighton again. You could also be using your property points to show the locations of damp and mold issues. So it might be showing where we've had damp and mold reported by maybe tenants or surveyors. And if I zoom into this particular grouping of damp and mold reports here, you might want to maybe analyze, the makeup of these particular properties. Why have these properties got damp and mold? Is there anything we know about these properties, like the heating and ventilation, or maybe the types of windows they have, which might be contributing to this particular issue? Or we could also look at some of the new building attributes available with the NGD buildings theme, and Rob will describe these in a bit more detail later. But here is an example of the NGD buildings features, and I've themed the buildings by the number of residential addresses within the footprints. And if I were to click maybe on this green building here, I can see a selection of attributes for this particular building footprint, and we might want to consider, is there any correlation between, where damp and mold is occurring, and maybe the number of residential addresses within the building footprint, or maybe in relation to the connectivity attribute, are we seeing damp and mold mostly in properties which are end connected. So for example, end of terraces. It's these types of analysis that you can perform with the data to maybe try and recognize those key characteristics that encourage damp and mold, and then use that information to find the most vulnerable properties within your stock, so you can be sort of proactive to try and prevent that issue. And then for my sort of final sort of use case example around sort of property points, I've launched a new map here, and this map is particularly specifically focused on sort of flood risk only. And yep, GIS gives you that ability to analyze the location of your properties in relation to flood risk areas, so you can understand if there is a risk of flood to your properties. Now, the Environment Agency provide free open data sets showing the potential flood risk areas, which is great because you can then risk assess the threat of flood, and a simple GIS analysis can identify properties that fall within those predicted flood risk areas. So in terms of forward planning, it could be a really useful exercise to understand that level of risk. But I also just wanted to quickly mention that the Environment Agency also provides an API service which provides real-time flood warning information, and that is updated on a 15-minute frequency. And this service is accessible in the CAD Corp software. So here I've got sort of housing areas. So these are these sort of reddish polygons, and then alongside that I'm displaying flood alerts and warning information from that API service. So I can see if there's any current risk of flood within these particular areas. But of course you can view these warnings alongside your own property point data. Now, for visualization purposes, when I zoom closely into the map, we move away from those symbols and we actually see the flood risk areas as we zoom into the map. And if I zoom a little bit more into Bridgewater, I've also got a dynamic overlay in the project, which will simply just display any properties that fall within any of those flood risk or flood warning areas. And then finally, if we just zoom back out again, you can also have a dynamic overlay which calculates, the number of properties which do fall within those flood warning areas. So here, just using my housing sort of patches, housing areas here, and using a label here just to display the number of properties that fall within any of the sort of flood warning and flood alert areas. And again, that is dynamic, so that will update as that flood warning information is updated as well. So that could be, a really helpful view, just so if you need to get into any sort of standby or emergency response mode, if any of your properties are likely to be affected by flood. So those are just a couple of use case examples where, geocoding your list of properties against the OS address-based product can provide that valuable geographical insight into your properties and help you with the day-to-day management of your assets. But it's not just address data that you can leverage a valuable insight from. As Ian described, there are other Ordnance Survey products that can help you with other business objectives. And you would have seen the master map topography layer throughout my demonstration so far. So this data set is in the background here, and that provides a really detailed topographic mapping for Great Britain down to the kind of the building level there. And this data set is used for many different purposes by social landlords. And obviously a simple starting point here is land registry ownership. So overlaying your land ownership polygons with the topography layer enables you to see what land you own and also what you're responsible for. And then from the title deeds, you can also capture and display T marks if they're present on the deeds. So this is a method for marking up the ownership of boundaries and who has a responsibility to maintain and repair them. And that's helpful if you have to deal with any boundary disputes, whether that's between your shared ownership properties or where you may have properties that share boundaries with private ownership. But of course, the most common sort of use case of the topography layer is recording your grounds maintenance areas, and it's used to draw the areas of grounds maintenance responsibilities. So you've got a record of what you need to maintain. But it's also a really good lookup if you get a query from a resident to customer services. They can obviously check the area to see if it's your responsibility to deal with. And that also leads nicely onto creating your bills of quantities, because the mapping provides accurate measurements for the areas you need to maintain. For example, how much grass are we cutting? And this helps you calculate those costs accurately if it's an internal function, or if you're going out to a third-party contractor, you can give them the accurate workloads and in return get a true cost of the works. And that also leads nicely onto the service charging. So the charge you're charging your customers for the upkeep of these grounds. With this use case, you may also subscribe to the master map imagery layer as well. So let's turn that imagery layer on in the map here. Again, that can be beneficial so you can get an alternative perspective to your areas of responsibilities. And then for my last example with the master map layers, I also heard from a customer recently that they were using sort of the topography layer and the imagery layer when processing requests for EV charging point installations, because they have a number of conditions for allowing EV charging points. Those conditions included that the property must have off-road parking, like a driveway. So that's to avoid any cables sort of trailing across communal footpaths. So they use a combination of aerial imagery and sort of the topography layer as part of that application process, just to check the property has suitable off-road parking. So that was just a selection of use case examples there for the use of the topography and imagery layers that can help with the sort of the day-to-day management of your assets. Now, just to finish off my demonstration this morning, I'll quickly just share with you some ideas for the Ordnance Survey highways or transport layer. So in this map, I've got the transport layer, and this basically provides a road network, and that allows you to perform a variety of routing analysis techniques. These are techniques that you can techniques and analysis that you can use web mapping to share with a wider audience. Now, one example, it could be looking at accessibility to sustainable transport. So, how easy it is to access sustainable forms of public transport from your properties, for instance, access to the bus network. Because I read that a 400-meter walking distance is a common standard that is applied to sort of the nearest bus stop. So here we've got our road network. I've got the locations of bus stops, so these blue squares here, and then I performed some routing analysis and created 400-meter walking distance isochrones from those bus stop locations. And we can view the output of that analysis and evaluate our existing or maybe potential new developments to see if they fall within 400 meters of the bus network. And then just to show you one more final example, I'm just going to zoom back out to Brighton for the last time today. I'm also going to look at another use case with the transport layer, and this is looking at accessibility to green space. But I'll also introduce to you another Ordnance Survey product, which is the Ordnance Survey Green Space Layer. So this is an open data set, and this data set shows the locations of public parks, playing fields, sports facilities, and using the road network, this time I looked at the availability of public green space from my properties. And this time I sort of color coded my properties to show the walking time to the nearest green space area. And I can use the results to spot any properties, that might be far away in terms of walking distance from a green space area. And then we might think about looking at opportunities to improve that. So we could look at our own sort of land ownership areas and see if there's any opportunities to introduce any green areas within our land ownership. And then, of course, with GIS and mapping, we can summarize that also at a higher geography here as well. So maybe for reporting purposes, looking at the Brighton area as a whole, just looking at how accessible our properties are to the nearest green space. And then just as one final point, the transport layer is also now supplied with average road speed data for different times of day. So if you've got a project in mind where you maybe want to analyze travel times or travel distances, you can use the average road speed data available from the NGD transport layer. So that could allow you to do some comparisons. So, how far can I travel during the rush hour periods in the morning and evening compared to sort of travel distances during sort of those off-peak periods. And yep, you can utilize the average road speed data to perform that type of analysis. So yeah, those are sort of a couple of use cases for the NGD transport layer for routing analysis projects. And actually, with that final example, I've now come to the end of my demonstration. So showing you a variety of use case examples with several Ordnance Survey products and how they can be used by social housing providers. So thank you for watching my demonstration. I'm now going to pass you back to Ian Usher. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Simon. There's some really good examples, and it's good to see the kind of from a demonstration point of view how it can be all brought together. So thank you very much for that, Simon. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to now pass you over to Robert Wingfield, who is going to introduce us to the National Geographic Database, or the NGD, and talk to us about how the relatively new NGD can support social housing providers with the challenges that they're currently facing. So I will make Robert presenter, and I'll pass over.
Thank you very much, Ian, and hope you can all see the screen. And thank you very much. It's great to be on this webinar today. So I'm going to talk through about how Ordnance Survey data and services can really support yourselves as social housing providers, really combat some pressing issues. And I'll particularly talk about some of the new analytical buildings data within the National Geographic Database, and also touch on a few wider principles and points as well during this presentation. So to start with, at a high level, a few key principles on location data about places. And location data really has a strong potential to help us better understand the world, where it is really authoritative and trusted, so where we know that the data is accurate and reliable. Secondly, where we know that data is high quality through the use of core data principles and recognized standards. And thirdly, where there is a golden thread, ensuring that data sets can be linked together through interoperability for greater insight and decision making for your use cases. And it's all about understanding patterns and trends, which is much easier when placed in that geographic context. It's about authoritative, trusted data, high quality, and interoperability. Three key principles about understanding place. And here at Ordnance Survey, as we are Great Britain's national mapping agency, and our data and services are recognised as authoritative and trusted for the reasons on this slide here. So firstly, we're really constantly innovating. We've also won several awards and sit on international bodies, and we have the public task set by central government under the Public Sector Geospatial Agreement, or PSGA. Our core large-scale analytical data, the National Geographic Database, which Ian and Simon have talked about, is one of the nation's most valuable data assets and has trusted key data sources at its heart, for example, local authorities and Royal Mail. And the benefits, therefore, are widespread, including right across public and private sector efficiencies, innovation, and insight. And furthermore to this, we're now really transforming our data and services for that analytical insight, so you can make trusted decisions based on authoritative data. And we released our new generation of products and services in 2022 through our National Geographic Database, or NGD for short, which at its heart is analytical in nature. The NGD is more than just a base map. A base map is usually inherently cartographical and visual, whereas the NGD provides that enhanced value through deep attribution of large-scale, detailed features covering the entirety of Great Britain. So we're increasing the data update frequency on our core large-scale data, sometimes on an up-to-daily cycle. And through this rich data and update frequency, we have the new and enhanced attribution to make the data much more analytical and easier to answer your questions. Our NGD data is also built very much with the future in mind. It's flexible, allowing for changes in the data structure and enhancements to be made when needed to meet your needs and requirements moving forward. And also, the data is much more discoverable. It's easy to find what you need and to really see its true potential in being much more plug and play. And taking the data through CADCorp's excellent GIS solutions, which Simon has demonstrated, you really are set up for success to see that value and to make those efficiencies and impact your decision making. But also, just to remind you, we do have a wide range of cartographic or visual and analytical geospatial data sets really describing the geography of Great Britain. So I talked a lot about our large-scale analytical data within the National Geographic database, but we also have a wide range of backdrop mapping contextual products, as well as address data, really with the UPRN, the unique property reference number at its heart, and networks data, including highways, topography data, and height data. So a wide range of large-scale data sets, both visual and also analytical as well. So I just want to bring this to life in a little bit more detail around how Ordnance Survey data can be utilised to analyse land and property. And with accurate, start with address, with accurate and trusted address data now available with up-to-daily updates, you can really understand and gain insight from the full address lifecycle, utilising that unique property reference number using our address portfolio of products. You can see this right from the pre-built stage through to a historic address. And with the address point crucially located within the building polygon itself, this allows you to carry out valuable analytics and spatial analysis using those accurate rooftop coordinates provided for each address, and utilize the richness of the local authority data within our address products to create that detailed picture to really utilize that interoperability. We have also released new land use sites features, really describing the geographic representation of an area that can be identified as being used for a particular purpose, for example, private residences. And we currently have 23 million residential sites captured. And this really seeks to define the extent of that activity of a residential site. So in simple terms, for an average residential property, you can assess the building and the associated gardens, for example, the front and back garden, as well as the building or the house itself, and link this through to buildings data and address data as well. You can quickly interpret that land use site data, perhaps to analyse biodiversity, to monitor changes to land use, to make decisions, to look at access points to sites for emergency services, to look at determining flood risk, and should you need to understand and report on land use. So a couple of really crucial use cases there within our sites data, a new geometry and polygon to really understand and bring to life the wider land around a private residence. Ultimately, as I've been mentioning a few times already, Ordnance Survey data is interoperable and forms a golden thread for our products and services. And I've listed some of the key identifiers here on this slide. So we have the UPRN, the unique property reference number, that unique identifier for every addressable location across the UK. And UPRNs are trusted and authoritative. They're allocated by local authorities and by Ordnance Survey. They provide accurate property identification, improved data integration and sharing that enhance address accuracy and consistency, really enabling that efficient service provision through spatial planning analysis and insights that are really data driven. We also have the unique street reference number, or USRN, and that authoritative link between the USRN and the UPRN. And Simon talked about routing earlier, and you can utilize the USRN in some of those routing tools. We also have the OS identifier, Ordnance Survey identifier, and this is the unique and persistent identifier to identify records in most of the NGD themes. And then we also have the TOID, topographic identifier, which is the identifier found in our master map products. So you can really start to understand that full golden thread. But as I mentioned at the very start, and we've mentioned throughout with regards to the National Geographic database, we are continually innovating and releasing new data. And we're releasing significant authoritative new data at the moment, approximately every 6 months. And I'm specifically going to talk about the buildings theme. I've already mentioned around land use and address, for example, but I'm just going to mention some specific ones relating to buildings theme and some of the critical use cases that might be important to yourselves as social housing providers. So firstly, I'm going to talk about building features, and this is a new building polygon geometry to represent a single building footprint, which will also be the main feature type of which will deliver the additional attribution enhancements I'm going to mention in a moment. And previously, we've only had the building parts on the left, and we've now got this sort of compound combined building feature to really to represent that single building footprint. And this facilitates easier selection and analysis of individual buildings, stronger integration and interoperability. Further to this, we're also releasing data on building connectivity, and Simon mentioned this a little earlier on. This really is around describing how many other buildings are connected to an individual building. So you can see here on the left-hand side the use of attributes such as standalone and multi-connected. And these attributes are useful, for example, in calculating risk potential, for improving emergency response and preparedness, but also for enabling quick identification and assessment of your building stock. For example, looking at patterns of mold prevention on unconnected buildings through that example that Simon talked about earlier on. A new attribution is also being released on building use. For example, understanding mixed-use buildings, utilising data from the sites data I mentioned a second ago and from address. And this can really be utilised for improving prevention planning for fire risk, also for improved situational awareness and greater understanding of risk in an area. And you can quickly filter and select different property types. And further to this, to link between buildings data and address data, we have released a new attribution for the count of build in use address UPRNs, unique property reference numbers, associated with that building. This includes the count of the number of residential and commercial properties within that building, any other classifications within our address portfolio, and also a total of the addresses within that building as well, or live addresses, I should say. And this is useful for quickly identifying and selecting properties of interest. And this saves time working across multiple data sets. Previously, you had to take this data from multiple different data sets. And this address count means you've got it in one place. This enables a quick insight as to the address makeup within that particular building. And the final enhancement I would like to mention is around the main building flag. This is an attribute intended to allow a casual visitor to identify the most useful building to represent that wider site. So I've talked about some of the core building enhancements that are currently live. This data is out there at the moment and is available through CAD-Corp. And just before I finish, I would just like to highlight our strong enhancement roadmap moving forwards. Appreciate this slide has a lot of data on it, but essentially we are continually enhancing our data, particularly within the National Geographic Database. And just to touch on some of those building enhancements, we're providing additional information very soon on building age, the number of floors within a building, the building status, for example, whether it's built or under construction. We're also looking at basement presence, the construction types, so for example, brick or timber. Also, the attribution on building roofs, including roof shape, aspect, construction material, and the presence of solar panels and green roofs. So these enhancements are coming forward throughout 2024 and potentially into next year as well. And we've also had some of the enhancements I've just talked about have already been released last year in 2023. So lots has been released, lots more still to come moving forwards as well. So overall, I've really tried to speak out the value and role that Ordnance Survey data and services in analysing address, buildings and land, and some of the interrelationships and interoperability between these data sets. You can access the data that I've been talking about through CAD-Corp, and they're very much here to help. As I mentioned earlier, CAD-Corp are an OS premium partner, and it's really great to be working very closely with CAD-Corp to support you, so you can really see the value and gain the insight for decision making and enabling your outcomes. So thank you very much, and many thanks to CAD-Corp again. My contact details are on the screen, and always happy to help and support. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Robert. That's a really good insight into kind of what's coming out from the Ordnance Survey in terms of what the organisations can utilise. So that's really good. Thank you very much for that. So I suppose the kind of the next to last slide for me is kind of the next step. So as you can see from the presentations that we've done and demonstrations, OS data and GIS can help with a number of challenges that we've identified that social housing providers are currently going through. As I've said at the start, if you wanted to talk about your current challenges, I'd be more than happy to set up a Teams meeting to discuss those issues further. and how you might use the GIS and the OS data to kind of get around them and resolve them. Another next step is to sign up for our final webinar in the series, so which will look at building a business case for GIS. So this will bring together the last two webinars that we've done. So this one, and we did a customer tenant kind of web map portal webinar that you can review back on our YouTube channel. But this final webinar will bring everything together so that you can use it to look at how to build a business case internally for GIS to be used across the organization. And it's going to be useful for those that are currently using GIS in terms of how you kind of get out the word of GIS to the wider audience, but also those that aren't and are just starting the kind of project with GIS as well. Okay, so I'm going to just turn my camera back on just for the question side of things. So I can see that there's been questions asked. We've only got a couple of minutes, so what I might do is the questions that have been asked, I might get back to you. There's one question that I think everybody will be asking, which is I'm hoping Robert can answer this. Does the OS NGD replace the OS master map data? So I don't know if you can just talk about that very briefly, Robert, if that's all right.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Ian. Yeah, it's a question I'm asked a lot, and master map topography layer was actually first released way back in November 2001, so over 20 years ago now. And the geospatial and location data world has changed significantly since then. And I think it's worth pointing out that master map is inherently a cartographic product. It's quite visual and it's great as a base map. But in terms of the features that you can query, for example, the buildings, we just tell you it's a building and a bit of chained history and metadata. We don't really give you any additional attribution, whereas the value that we've been showing today around the National Geographic Database, the NGD, provides that analytical power to make more informed decisions. And one day master map topography layer as a downloadable data set, like all products, will one day be withdrawn. However, it still has very, very strong use, and we have no plans or published timelines right now in place for withdrawal. It will still be around for a few years yet. And as a premium partner, CADCORP has an excellent relationship with Ordnance Survey, and I'm sure, CADCORP's expert teams will be able to support you all the way. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. I suppose from our point of view as a data provider, I think we'll keep what Robert said under review, and we'll kind of let you guys know when we know kind of what's happening with it as well. So we'll keep us up to date as what we're kept, so we can let you know anything that comes out of it. Thank you very much for that, Robert. I suppose the final slide for me is just say thank you very much for everyone attending today. I hope that you found it really informative. A massive thank you to Robert from the Ordnance Survey and Simon for the demonstrations and presentations today. They've been really useful, and I'm sure that everybody attending today found them really informative, which is great. Please don't forget about the exit survey when you're leaving the webinar, as this provides the opportunity to ask any further questions and provides feedback as well. And again, thank you for attending today, and I hope that we see you at the final webinar on the 30th of January. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.